Captain James Carter had once been a name whispered with respect on the battlefield, a soldier of unwavering loyalty, a man who never backed down from a fight, and a leader who inspired those around him. His days in the military were filled with missions, camaraderie, and a sense of purpose. He had fought wars not just with weapons, but with determination, standing shoulder to shoulder with his fellow soldiers. But those days were long past. The medals that once gleamed proudly on his chest now sat forgotten in an old wooden box, gathering dust. The uniform that once fit him so well now hung limply in his closet, untouched for years. Now, Carter's battlefield was different. It was not an open war zone filled with the chaos of battle. It was a small, quiet hospital room where time was the enemy. The beeping of heart monitors had replaced the sound of gunfire, and the scent of antiseptic filled the air instead of the smoke of war. His body, once strong and unyielding, had grown weak. His hands, which once held a rifle with unshakable strength, now trembled when he reached for a glass of water. Yet, even in the stillness of his hospital bed, Carter remained a soldier. He did not complain. He did not seek pity. He had always known that every battle had an end, and he had made peace with his. But there was one thing left, one final wish that tugged at his heart. When the nurse asked if there was anything he wanted, Carter could have asked for anything. He could have asked for special treatment, for a medal to be presented in his honor, or even for his name to be recognized in history books. But he wanted none of that. Instead, he whispered, his voice fragile but firm, "I want to see General Anderson one last time." General Anderson, a name spoken with admiration and respect, a man who had led thousands, a leader whose strategies had turned the tide of battles. To the world, he was a war hero. But to Carter, he was more than that. He was a mentor, a guide, and most importantly, a commander he had always looked up to. The hospital staff did not know what to say. Could such a request even be fulfilled? General Anderson was no ordinary man. His time was valuable, his name recognized everywhere. Would he even remember a single soldier among the many he had led decades ago? Still they tried. Calls were made. Emails were sent. But there was no response. Carter remained in his bed, his eyes heavy with time, his body weakening with each passing day. But he kept waiting. Would his request be answered? Would he get to see the man who had once led him into battle before his time ran out? Days passed in the quiet halls of the Veterans Hospital, and Captain Carter remained in his bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, lost in thought. His body was failing, but his mind still clung to the memories of the past, the battles, the friendships, the sacrifices. Yet, the one thing that occupied his heart the most was his final wish, to see General Anderson one last time. The hospital staff had done their best. They had contacted military offices, sent emails, and even reached out to organizations that might have access to General Anderson. But a man of his stature was not easy to reach. He was retired now, living a quiet life away from the public eye, and his whereabouts were not easily available. Still, the nurses refused to give up. They had grown fond of Captain Carter, a man who never asked for anything, a man who had served his country with honor and dignity. If this was his last request, they were determined to make it happen. One of the nurses, Emily, took it upon herself to do more. She searched through every military contact she could find, speaking to retired officers, veterans, and anyone who might have even the smallest connection to General Anderson. It was a long shot, but she refused to let Carter leave this world without at least trying everything. Meanwhile, Carter's condition was worsening. His breaths were slower, his voice weaker. But when Emily came to his bedside and told him that they were still trying, he simply smiled. "Thank you," he whispered. He was more than just a general. He was someone who believed in us, in me. "I just want to see him again." Emily nodded, squeezing his frail hand. She didn't have the heart to tell him that the chances were slim. But just as hope seemed to be fading, something unexpected happened. A response. One of the messages had finally reached the right ears. A retired colonel, an old friend of General Anderson, had seen the request and personally ensured that it was delivered. The message reached Anderson's personal assistant, and within hours, Anderson himself was made aware of the situation. The general was silent for a long time after hearing the request. He had led thousands of men into battle, had seen them fight, bleed, and sacrifice everything. But one name, one voice, had reached out to him after all these years. Did he remember Carter? Yes, he did. A young, determined soldier who had once stood before him, waiting for orders, willing to lay down his life without hesitation. Anderson did not hesitate. He did not send a message back. He did not make a phone call. He simply gave one order: prepare the car. I'm going. Back in the hospital, Carter's breathing had grown shallow. The nurses feared the worst, that he might not hold on much longer. But something in him was still fighting, still waiting. He was a soldier, after all, and soldiers don't give up easily. The hospital was about to witness a moment it would never forget. The wheels of the black sedan rolled swiftly over the asphalt, heading toward a veterans' hospital. General Anderson sat in the back seat, his eyes staring out the window, lost in thought. The roads blurred past him, but his mind was elsewhere, drifting through memories of the past, through the years of war, through the faces of the men he had led. It had been a lifetime ago. Captain James Carter. Anderson remembered the name. He had not just been another soldier in the ranks. He had been young, full of fire, willing to follow orders without hesitation. He had fought bravely, never questioning the mission, never showing fear. And now, decades later, this same soldier had asked to see him one last time. Anderson did not know what to expect. What would he say? What words were there for a man standing at the edge of life, clinging to a final wish? His driver spoke, pulling Anderson from his thoughts. "Sir, we'll be arriving in 10 minutes. Anderson nodded. His hands tightened into fists on his lap. There was no war now, no enemy to fight, only time, and time was a cruel opponent. He had seen so many soldiers fade away, buried with honors, their sacrifices remembered but their voices lost. He would not let Carter be one of them. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the air was tense. The staff had received word that General Anderson was on his way, and a silent anticipation filled the corridors. Emily, the nurse who had fought so hard to make this moment happen, hurried into Carter's room. "Captain," she said softly, leaning close to him. "He's coming. General Anderson is coming." Carter's tired eyes flickered open. For a moment, there was no reaction. Then, something changed. A spark, faint but unmistakable. A small smile curled on his lips. He's really coming?" Emily nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes, he's on his way." Carter tried to sit up, but his body was weak. The effort left him breathless, but he didn't care. For the first time in days, his heart pounded with something more than exhaustion. Down the hall, the doors of the hospital swung open. The sight of the tall, silver-haired figure stepping through them sent a wave of whispers through the staff. General Anderson had arrived. His posture was still strong, his presence commanding, but there was something softer in his eyes, a solemnity, an unspoken respect. The staff guided him toward Carter's room. With each step, Anderson felt the weight of the years pressing on his shoulders. Then, finally, he stood at the doorway. Carter looked up, and for a moment, time stood still. Neither man spoke. Neither man needed to. In Carter's eyes, the old soldier he had once followed into battle still stood before him, unchanged by time. And in Anderson's gaze, he did not see a patient in a hospital bed. He saw a soldier, his soldier, who had never stopped fighting. Anderson stepped forward, his movement slow but deliberate. Without a word, he reached out and clasped Carter's frail hand. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with memories, with battles fought, with victories and losses, with unspoken gratitude. Carter's voice was barely above a whisper. "You came." Anderson nodded, his grip firm. "Of course, soldier." A moment that had taken decades to come had finally arrived. Two men, once bound by war, now bound by something even stronger, a respect that had endured through time itself. But there was still more to say, still more to feel, and time, though relentless, had granted them this moment. For now, that was enough. The room was silent except for the slow, steady beeping of the heart monitor. The air was thick with emotion, the kind that needed no words to be understood. Captain Carter lay in his hospital bed, his frail hand held firmly by General Anderson, the man he had once followed into battle. A lifetime of memories passed between them in the quiet, each one more vivid than the last. For a moment, Carter was not an aging veteran confined to a bed. He was a soldier again, standing tall, his boots planted firmly in the mud of a battlefield. He could hear the distant echoes of commands being shouted, the rumble of tanks, the sharp crack of gunfire. But most of all, he could feel the presence of his brothers in arms, the ones who had fought beside him, the ones who had never come home. Anderson saw it too. He saw it in Carter's eyes. The flicker of life that war had given him in time had tried to take away. He could not bring back the past, but he could be here now, in this moment, to honor the man who had never stopped fighting. And so, he spoke, not as a general, not as a legend, but as a fellow soldier. "You never left the battlefield, did you?" Anderson's voice was deep, steady, yet filled with something rare, genuine emotion. Carter let out a weak chuckle, his lips curving into a small smile. "No, sir. Some battles you don't walk away from. You carry them." Anderson nodded, his grip on Carter's hand tightening. "You carried it well, soldier." Carter's breathing was slow, deliberate. He had so much he wanted to say, yet he knew his time was running short. His body was failing him, but his spirit remained unbroken. There was only one thing left to do. With great effort, he raised his trembling hand, trying to bring it to his forehead. A salute, not out of duty, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Respect for his commander, respect for his past, respect for everything he had ever stood for. Anderson saw the struggle, and without hesitation, he lifted his own hand in return. A salute that spoke volumes more than any words ever could. It was not to rank, not to power, but to loyalty, to brotherhood, to a bond that had withstood the test of time. The moment stretched, eternal and sacred. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for this final act, Captain James Carter closed his eyes. A soldier's farewell not in battle, but in the quiet company of the man he had respected most. The heart monitor gave a long, steady beep. The room fell into silence. Emily, the nurse who had fought to make this moment possible, wiped a tear from her eye. The staff stood in solemn respect, knowing they had just witnessed something rare and beautiful, a warrior's final wish fulfilled. General Anderson remained still for a long time. He had seen many men fall in battle, but this was different. This was not just the passing of a soldier. This was the end of an era. Slowly, he reached forward and placed his hand over Carter's, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rest easy, soldier. Your watch is over." And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, his posture as strong as ever, but his heart heavier than it had been in a long time. He had come as a commander, but he left as something else, a friend paying tribute to one of the finest men he had ever known. Outside, the wind was gentle, the sky clear, and somewhere, far beyond reach of time, a young soldier stood once more, boots in the mud, head held high, ready for whatever came next. A hero forever remembered.